Hey everyone, Seth Mayo here from the Loman Planetarium at MOAS, and I'm here once again doing another virtual tour of our sky tonight. And for this week, we're covering April 27th through May 3rd. So we've already gone through most of April, heading into May, and going farther into the springtime. And so I'll show you what to expect. So let's get started by setting the sun as usual, looking towards the western part of our horizon as we kind of slide to that side here in this 3D program we call Stellarium. For those who haven't tuned in before, this is a free software you can download on your computer to look at the sky anytime and from any place on Earth. So it's quite useful. So let's set our sun, speeding up time here. And you'll see just above the sun the very thin crescent moon. Earlier in the week, the moon might not be very easy to spot during the daytime. You could see it, but might be still difficult for how thin of a crescent it is. But of course, once the night settles in, then you'll definitely see the moon. And what you will see, at least earlier in the week, pretty near the moon, just below it, is this bright-looking object. You see it kind of coming into view. Let's speed up time a little bit more, and that is still the planet Venus, second planet from the sun, shining very bright in the west. It's going to look like a star that doesn't twinkle. And this week in particular is the brightest it gets, actually, because of where it is in its orbit. It's pretty close to us, and it's at the phase that it's not too small. So just like the moon, Venus goes through phases because its orbit is within our orbit. As it goes around the sun can hit it at different angles, and it allows us to see different parts of Venus. So it's not too small of a phase, and it's pretty close to us or pretty big in our sky, making Venus very bright. I'll zoom in, I'll show you the phase. If you have a telescope or even binoculars, you can actually see the phases of Venus. And it's very apparent, especially when it's this sort of crescent shape that you see here. And there it is. So here's the gaseous, cloudy, well, it's a rocky planet, but it's covered in a thick haze of carbon dioxide. And that's the atmosphere you see here. That's very reflective. And there is the crescent shape that I'm talking about. It's pretty cool to see in a telescope. So Venus is very bright. And this week it's around negative 4.5 to maybe negative 4.73 in magnitude. And if you're not familiar with magnitude scale, the lower the number, the lesser the number, the brighter the object gets. Just kind of the way it works. So for reference, the sun is negative 25. That's the brightest thing in our sky, of course. The moon is about negative 12. All right. Venus is in the negative 4 kind of region. It's the third brightest natural object in our sky. The brightest star, Sirius, is about negative 1.45 right now. So that's pretty bright, brightest star in the sky. And for another star for reference, the North Star, Polaris, is not as dim. It's not one of the brightest stars, but that's at about positive 1.95 in magnitude. So that's just kind of gives you something to compare with when it comes to brightness of objects. So Venus is extraordinarily bright this week. And take a look at that in the west, still below the moon. The moon will be fairly close to it earlier in the week, and then the moon will kind of drift away, moving farther east night to night this week. But we'll have a nice crescent moon starting out. That's kind of nice. And then we'll set the sun, giving us still a nice view of all of these leftover wintertime stars in the western part of our sky, as you can see here. Venus earlier in the week and even into a couple days into the week here as we get into maybe Tuesday, and then there's the moon again, and then Wednesday. It's passing through this constellation I haven't talked about much lately, and this is Gemini, the Gemini twins from Greek mythology. Gemini means twins, by the way. So I can show you these two stars. Those are the head stars of the twins. Their names are Pollux, that's the name of that star, and this is Castor. Right there, so you have Pollux and Castor of the twins. There they are, and they're kind of these stick figure shapes, sort of holding hands. Kind of neat. I can put up their pictures. There we go. So there are the twins. So the moon will be kind of passing through that, and then later on through the week here, the moon will continue its eastward trek, higher and higher in the sky as it gets to first quarter phase, half full, and then by closer to the weekend, the moon will enter the stars of Leo the Lion, which I have mentioned recently. So here's the head, this hook shape of Leo, the body, and the tail, this triangular shape, the tail of Leo. And I'll click on this star to activate the constellation. That's called Regulus, which means little king. Part of the name has regal in it. And so regal, of course, means, royalty, right? So Regulus being little king, and lions are associated with royalty. So that's a very prominent spring sky. It's very high up, right as the sun sets. You can see it for a good portion of our night. So that's pretty special in that part of the sky. So we'll kind of watch the moon sort of go through first quarter, or crescent into first quarter, and then a little bit into what's called gibbous, when the moon is a little more than half full in the sky. So that'll be nice to kind of see the moon as we see it move eastward night to night this week. Anyway, so we'll put the moon back to kind of the beginning of the week here, where it sits just above Venus. There's Venus again in our sky, so that's still nice to see over there. And since we're in spring, those spring stars are in full view. I already showed you Leo here. There's the head of the hook there. You always want to look for that for Leo. Kind of trailing Leo the Lion in the sky, or I guess you could say even following Leo, are these two bright stars right here, kind of in the eastern part of our sky, rising out of the east. And they're very bright, especially this star here. This is Arcturus. Arcturus is the fourth brightest star in the sky. And it's a red giant star kind of bloating up as it's dying. And so that's really nice. And then not far, kind of south of it, is the star called Spica right there too. Spica is actually part of a constellation that to me looks like the Big Dipper. Actually, it's not the Big Dipper, but it looks like it. This is Virgo the Maiden. It'll show some of the other spring constellations I sort of just talked about here, or the stars that are part of them. Arcturus is part of Boötes the herdsman, and Spica, which means ear of wheat, is part of Virgo, Virgo the Maiden, or this woman here in the sky. So there she is, Virgo, standing kind of below Leo and next to Boötes the herdsman. And that's in the east, over here towards the, if you're in Daytona, of course, looking towards the beach, but the eastern part of our sky. Not far away from that is very prominently above, kind of in the northeast, is the Big Dipper. This is a great time to see the Big Dipper in the sky. I've already mentioned that in previous episodes, but I really want to stress that the Big Dipper is great at this time of year. It sits really nicely in our sky. There's the handle. There is the bowl of the Big Dipper. So you got the handle, the bowl shape of these 7 bright stars. Here, these 2 stars at the end of the handle, or end of the bowl, point you to the North Star. Remember I mentioned that the North Star has a magnitude of 1.95. You can look up here in the information, magnitude 1.95. So that's the magnitude you want to look at there. It's called the apparent magnitude. That's the brightness as you would see from planet Earth. That allows you to kind of compare the star brightnesses from our planet. And so not the brightest star, but definitely something you could notice in the northern part of the sky. And as we speed up time, that North Star Polaris looks like it's just sitting there because our North Pole points right to it. Now, I haven't turned something off. You'll notice these little dots flying past on the screen there. I kind of left them on in this episode here. This program, Stellarium, actually will predict where some satellites are located. And that's a very surprising thing for many people, is how many satellites you can see in the sky. It's pretty surprising, actually. And I always tell people, when you go out, if I spend 2 to 3 minutes looking up, I can usually find 1 or 2 satellites at almost any time within a couple minutes or so, or at least maybe 5 minutes. There are so many satellites in low Earth orbit of all different types: communication satellites, satellites that study various things, observational satellites. And so these satellites are reflective, and the sun hits them, and they're going to look like stars that slowly move across the sky. And so you'll notice they're not blinking and have red and green lights like an airplane. They're not twinkling, really. They can flare up and then dim down again as the sun hits them at different angles, or if they fall into the shadow of Earth again. So they're really cool. And sometimes you see the space station, which is the brightest satellite. and it's brighter than any planet in the sky. It's really, really nice. So those are some things that you can sometimes see if you look closely in our sky. So that's kind of neat. So anyway, that's why you see some, if I speed up time, you notice these little dots dancing around. And those are the predicted satellites that Stellarium can show you. And again, the North Star just sits there through the night as our North Pole points in that direction. So the stars move in a counterclockwise direction around that star. Very useful for navigation, kind of figuring out your orientation in the sky. If you can find where north is, you can figure out every other direction in the sky. Now, as I was speeding up time, I've already taken us to a pretty late hour here. So this is now, this is of course 24-hour clock here. So this would be midnight, 12:28 the next morning. And as you stay up kind of later and later, you'll notice some summer stars start to peak. So for reference here, this is Arcturus and Spica. That was a little lower in the east earlier on in the presentation. And then you'll start to see some summer stars. This is Vega, part of the summer triangle. You can't see the whole triangle just yet, but Vega really kind of shows you that summer is just around the corner, you know. And then the other star that may catch your eye in the southeast is this star that's kind of a reddish glow to it. This is Antares. A lot of stars have that start with letter A, and which are, you know, most of the time are Arabic names. So it's easy to kind of confuse a lot of these names. So this is Antares, which some speculate means, you know, the rival of Mars, because Mars is the planet that is also known as Ares. We go by the Roman name Mars, but the Greek name is Ares, the god of war. The red planet looked like a fiery, warlike place. So Mars can pass by this star and sometimes look like it. And so some believe that this star is sort of named, you know, anti-Mars or rival of Mars. That's just one idea that's sort of floating out there about that. The names of these stars have changed and have been adapted over time. So sometimes these things are not totally proven, some of these meanings or the origins of these star names, but it's kind of interesting to look into it. Anyway, this is a giant star, one of the biggest stars you can find in the sky. I love talking about it. It's hundreds of times bigger. Some estimates put it at 700 times bigger than our sun. If you put it where our sun is, this star Antares, which I haven't clicked on it, that star could possibly reach out past the orbit of Mars. It's so big. It's hard to imagine that. About 12 times more massive than the sun. So this is called a red giant star. Really, really big star. And it sits at the heart of something called Scorpius, which I'll briefly show you here. It looks like a giant S in the southern sky here. Again, a prominent summertime constellation that you can see late in our sky. You can always see the next season's constellations in the really late or early morning sky. So here's this sort of S shape. This is the tail, stinger, body, and head of Scorpius. I can actually, let's click on another star here to show it to you, and I'll put up the picture of this giant scorpion in the sky. So Antares is the heart of the scorpion, and it's kind of a reddish star, so very appropriate for it to represent a heart of this creature. All right, and a few more things I'll show you before we wrap things up. In the morning, and we've already mentioned this as well, we even had a separate video from one of our planetarium educators, Christian, who mentioned a bit about these morning planets that you can see before sunrise. This is great. And even if you get up in the 5 or 6 o'clock hour even, you'll see these non-twinkling star-like objects here. Two of them are kind of close. This is Saturn and Jupiter. That's really cool. Two gas planets that they look close in the sky. They're pretty far away from each other, but they look close to us as they kind of line up from our point of view. So those are nice. And then we have the planet Mars a little farther east there. The reddish glow kind of gives Mars away, the fourth planet from our sun. And so that's pretty cool too. And Mars and these two planets, Saturn and Jupiter, are kind of drifting away from each other. But fairly soon as we get to the summer months, we'll start to see Jupiter and Saturn in our nighttime sky. So stay tuned for that. And then eventually later in the year, Mars will join our evening sky as well. So lots to look forward to for planets coming up. But this week, like I mentioned earlier, Venus is the brightest it gets. And it's pretty close to us. It's pretty big in our sky. So definitely pay attention to that. But if you're up early in the morning, definitely pay attention as well to these planets. And then, of course, we'll have the sun to rise again for another new day, which is a great way to conclude this presentation. So there we have it, another weekly update of our sky. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you're getting out there and stargazing, planet gazing, or just exploring the universe in some way. It's always a lot of fun. So take care. Hope to have you back here for another update of our sky. And thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.